My name is Dozier Hammond. I'm the trade book manager of the bookstore here on campus, and I'd like to welcome you all to Ackerman Graham Ballroom. The trade book department of ASUCLA, along with ASUCLA campus events, UCLA Cultural and Recreational Fairs, and the departments of history and sociology are the sponsors of today's talk. We're very honored to have a great Chicagoan and American, Studs Terkel, with us today. We've heard this during the last week. UCLA has been honored, perhaps, by George Bush, Michael Dukakis, Jesse Jackson, and Lloyd Benson today, along with Barbara Mikulski and some others. But I think we have one of the premier chroniclers of the American experience with us, somebody who's looked at U.S. life from the 30s now through the 80s. And I'm very honored to bring up Wendy Pollack from the campus event staff, who will introduce Studs Terkel. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Dozier. Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Pollack, and welcome to today's Campus Events Speakers Program. Our guest today stands as America's foremost oral historian and social recorder. A national folk hero, he has received international acclaim for his work in both broadcasting and literature. His celebrated national public radio program, the Studs Terkel Almanac, has garnered the Peabody Award for Excellence in Broadcasting. His 8 books, which include Working, Hard Times, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning history of World War II, The Good War, have been both critical and popular successes. And this summer, our guest made his Hollywood debut as a sports reporter in John Sayles' film 8 Men Out. In his newest work, The Great Divide, Second Thoughts on the American Dream, Terkel and his respondents contemplate changes in the American value system in the 1980s. He reflects on our national loss of memory, an absence of historical perspective which seems to produce a simultaneously compassionate and individualistic nation. His portrait of everyday Americans is, like the man himself, warm, perceptive, and intelligent. Will you please join me in giving a warm UCLA welcome to Mr. Studs Terkel?
Thank you, Wendy and Dozier. Thank you. I'll first say I do not like Tom Lasorda. I thought that'd be a good way to court your favor right off the bat. Now, I was thinking I'd like this to be very informal. We're here. It should be, I know it's a large hall. There's a mic in the aisle there. I like what black churches call call and response, questions and answers. And call and response, you've heard preachers, you heard Jesse Jackson the other day, Martin Luther King. See, it's more than a talk. It's almost a song. They're bards in black churches, and the audience responds. This is the basis of jazz, the basis of a lot of work songs. And I like it this way with words as well. Now, this book, The Great Divide, the subtitle is interesting, Second Thoughts on the American Dream, is different from all the others I've done. Much, much more difficult. Much, much more challenging. See, the other books, one, say, Hard Times, dealing with the Great Depression of the 30s. We'll come to that matter of history in a minute. I'm glad that Wendy majors in history. I said, thank God she majors in history, you know. And I say, not business administration? What sort of American are you? You know. And so I was thinking the Great War, or rather Hard Times, dealt with the Depression of the 30s. People, survivors, remembered, so it dealt with memory. The Good War dealt with World War II. It dealt with people remembering, dealt with memory. Not to say the memory was perfect, flawed, of course, but there were core truths recalled. This book deals with what I call absence of memory. It deals with now and what the nation may be suffering with this moment I call a collective Alzheimer's disease. In that there is no sense of yesterday, there is no sense of past. There's sort of a national amnesia. Example, not this assemblage here, of course, but I'll cite case in point. There's a guy named Frank Wilkerson. Frank Wilkerson is an old maverick. Not very old. He's a couple of years younger than I am. Why do I say old? Anyway, so Frank Wilkerson has got the biggest FBI file in history. He made the Guinness Book of Records. His pages, 132,000 pages. He boasts that he and John Edgar Hoover cost the American taxpayers $17 million. When he was young, though, he went to Stanford. And as you'd expect, he was a fan of Herbert Hoover. Anyway, he was head of Young Americans for Herbert Hoover. And as the years went by, instead of becoming more, God help us, conservative, as the word is used, he became more and more the dissenter. And so he made the FBI files. So he's telling a joke. He's now become an authority on the First Amendment, and rightfully so. He knows it very well. So he talks a lot to law school students on various campuses. Now, these are college students, remember that. Now, they've gone to undergraduate, now they're law school students, and he's telling a joke. He says, why would the FBI tail a guy who was a fan of Herbert Hoover? He expects a laugh. No response. Then the awful truth hits him. He says, Herbert Hoover was president of the United States. And the audience roared. They got the joke. They didn't know Herbert Hoover was. So you see, this is an astonishing aspect of it. And they go to law school. Now and then, as I fool around, I talk to people. For a guy who's supposed to have the reputation of a listener, I talk a great deal. And so I pick up conversation at bus stops, and I talk in bars just to get conversation. I sometimes walk into singles bars, and they think I'm a superannuated satyr, And so I hear these trivia games being played and trivial questions asked about the Bears or about Joan Collins or something. And I'm going to ask a trivial question, too. I says, hey, trivia, who fought in World War II? And they said, well, I beg your pardon? Says he, very handsome looking, too. And girl, very beautiful, very bright, seemingly. And he says, who fought in World War II? Well, we did. Oh, great. We beat Japan and Germany. See, because they saw John Wayne, a late movie, lift the flag on Iwo Jima, you see. I said, that's pretty good. Did we win it by ourselves? You mean, did we have allies? Yeah, did we have allies? He says, let's see. England, am I right? Blow right on the button. You got it. See, they saw Greer Garson and Mrs. Miniver in the late movie, see. Biting the lower lip to keep a stiff upper lip, see. And so that's pretty good. Then comes the kicker question. By the way, on whose side was Russia in World War II? And they say, Russia, World War II. Russia wasn't in World War II. But she raised her hand. Oh, very bright. Could be a great drum majorette, And she says, Russia was on Germany's side. I said, how'd you come to that conclusion? I begin to sound like Bob Newhart, talking. How'd you come to that conclusion? And she says, well, they're the enemy, right? So there you have it. You see, that's the legacy of the Cold War. And now Gorbachev looks like he's going to double-cross us. He may deprive us of an enemy, see. So we're in a tough situation at this moment. But the big thing is the lack of sense of history enabling clowns in high office to get away with any kind of revision or distortion of history. And this is what it's about. And so the word liberal, you've heard Benson here, Cox, you heard Jesse. The word liberal now becomes a pejorative word. See, not only is history distorted, but language becomes perverted as well. The word liberal, he says card-carrying liberal. Now, the word card-carrying has a subversive connotation. Because in the McCarthy days, the phrase was card-carrying communist. Now it's card-carrying liberal. 5 years from now, it'll be card-carrying moderate, And eventually, card-carrying sane person. This is the way we go with language. And so in the caucus, instead of saying, how dare you insult the intelligence of the American public, how dare you, you're against perversion, we know that, Mr. Bush, how dare you pervert the American language? Why, come on, you can come on with a dictionary, any dictionary, Webster, Oxford, Random House, any dictionary, and look up the word liberal, and you'll find two definitions. At the beginning, there are more. Liberal, this is the caucus now in my fantasy. As a matter of fact, I declare for the President of the United States myself. Okay. So I am candidate, this is the ultimate fantasy, right? So I am candidate for president, and I am challenging Dukakis before millions of viewers, and I come on with a dictionary, and I heard him say, call me a card-carrying liberal. And after I say perverting language and all that, here's the definition. I pointed to the screen. First definition, liberal, generous. Aren't we proud? Don't we brag every day we're the most generous-hearted nation ever was? That we're so good, we're generous. Do you, Mr. Bush, want us to be mean-spirited and pebble-hearted? Is that it? Now comes the second definition, liberal. One who is tolerant of the opinions of others. By God, or I should say, by George. So now I'm Paul Harvey, see. By George, we are the one country where anybody can speak his mind and contrast to other societies. Do you, Mr. Bush, want us to be closer to a police state? Is that it? So that's what I think that would change the course somewhat of the election campaign. At least it would give it some juiciness, some pep, some spice. Now we come back to the book again, this absence of history. So the book is not all that aspect. There's something else going on. I call it the Great Divide. You know what the Great Divide is? Geologically, there's a fault that runs from the Gulf of Mexico straight through up through Alaska, and it becomes the Continental Divide, big, near the Rockies. But I'm talking about the psychic divide, the divide that separates haves from have-nots, and the have-somewhats who may become the have-nots within 4 or 5 years. And it's also the great divide of race, of course, the great divide of religion. Fundamentalism is against mainline churches, and even among fundamentalists there's a divide. We always think of fundamentalists as being Jerry Falwell or Jimmy Swaggart. Fundamentalists, some of them are also peace people, believe it or not. Some are sanctuary people. For example, there's a young guy I know, Christian evangelical, fundamentalist, who went down to Salvador as a missionary, and he came back, a rather different person. He believes literally in scriptures. So does his father. The family Bible is on that table in the parlor, the same Bible they've read all their lives. The father interprets it as being in favor of Reagan's policy in Nicaragua. By God, we've got to stop the commies and all. Literally. The son interprets it from the standpoint he learned of campesinos, of the peasants of Latin America, who interpret it literally as oppressor versus the oppressed, and which side was Christ on. So they determine it that way. So the same two guys, father and son, are fundamentalists, read the Bible precisely opposite. That's also part of the Great Divide. And the other divide, of course, is past from present, this absence of memory that leads to some of the situations we're in today. But there is also, in this book, there's something else, and that's why I hate polls very much. These election polls are utterly meaningless. I hate the idea of paid TV commercials, but political ones. They should be out, everybody entitled to the same. And from the first day of primary to the last election night entry, I'd ban all TV pundits and have simply the candidates against themselves and us. And now we argue among ourselves. We debate instead of speaking. That's what it's all about, too. So, something happens to people as we're fed trivia onto trivia, distortion onto distortion, flag-waving onto flag-waving, pledges of allegiance onto pledges of allegiance. Something happens to people in which they do something that they may not even think they want to do deep, deep down. There's a teacher, Bob Franke, teaches in Little Rock. It's an extension of the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. And his class consists primarily of creationists, anti-evolution, ultra right-wing families, fundamentalists, of course. And the subject of AIDS comes up. And to a student, they say, we have no sympathy for them, the perverts, and they should die, they deserve to, because we have no compassion for them. And then he shows them a movie, a documentary on an AIDS victim and family, and they all start weeping. Some of them sob uncontrollably. Now, they are weeping for the people they a moment ago damned. Now, to me, that is the metaphor, one of the metaphors of the book that is most striking to me. Another is Jean Gump, this remarkable woman, devout Catholic grandmother, head of PTA of a middle-class suburb outside Chicago, who also takes the Bible, scriptures literally, and Old Testament too. And so it says, Jeremiah the prophet says, we got to mold swords into plowshares and study war no more. And her grandson was just born. She sees all those missile sites in Missouri, and she goes out there to pour some blood onto it, and a young Catholic kid with her the size of a linebacker who believes as she does, uses a hammer and he loosens a screw, and they wait for the army to come and arrest them because they informed them. And here comes the army, and there's the enemy. And there's Gene Gump with a sense of humor and glass sitting on the missile, and the bullhorn voice says, will the personnel get off that missile and walk forward and throw all your hand belongings forward as far as you can? She tosses a purse toward a young soldier who's pointing his gun at her, and he's trembling. I look at this kid. He's younger than my youngest kid. He's got the gun pointed at me, the enemy. And just then I feel my nose is starting to run, and I got a handkerchief in that purse. So I say to this young soldier, I got to blow my nose. I'm going to get my handkerchief in that purse. He says, you can't move. You can't move. I was ordered not to. He says, what are you going to do, shoot me? I got to blow my nose, And so she says, shoot if you must, this old gray head, but I'm going to blow my nose. And so she gets the handkerchief, and she describes these funny scenes. Well, anyway, she was sentenced to 8 years in the federal pen, but the judge was very kind. It was Christmas time, so he cut it down to 6 years. And so that's about less than Ivan Boesky got. And so, in any event, here's another metaphor. As she's in jail in Kansas City waiting for sentence to court, the matron, the guard, is shoving the lunch through the slot on a tray to her, and she whispers, God bless you, Mrs. Gump, for what you're doing, implying she believes in it fervently. And then Gene sees her walk and join the other guards and walk out as an automaton, you see, the same person, you see. So what she says inside and what she does may be two different things. And then there's Doug Roth. He's a defrocked Lutheran pastor. And you may have read about him outside Pittsburgh. His parish consists of steel workers who are all unemployed. The plants were closed. And Doug and some of his young colleagues feel that the Mellon Bank in Pittsburgh played a big role in this, as indeed they did, at the closing of the plants. And he sees the suicides going on regularly, the unemployed people. And so he speaks out, and he does things like he goes to the Mellon Bank with some of his colleagues, and he remembered the parable of the 7 little fishes and 5 loaves of bread. So they deposit frozen fish in the safety deposit boxes of the bank before the weekend. And so he says, we raised a stink, literally, And, of course, he was defrocked. But he is also mocked, ridiculed, rebuked by the press, the so-called liberal press, which, of course, is a joke. Liberal. The press is so scared of being called liberal that never has a president received the pass Ronnie has these past 8 years, nor for that matter Reagan. Do you read the Los Angeles Weekly? You know that alternative paper? There's a great issue just came out on Bush and Quayle. Hardly mentioned in the press. It's chapter verse cited. Well, in any event, what was I talking about? I forgot now. Oh, I was talking about Doug Roth. And so Doug Roth is walking me to the Pittsburgh airport after our conversation. Everybody recognizes him because he's in the papers. I say, kidded. And now and then somebody walks up to him and whispers. I said, what did he say? He says, I'm with you, Pastor. I'm with you. And then they run away. So you have this double theme throughout the book. And so these are what I call the slender reeds of hope. There are those who just go along and not knowing why, but go along. And then there are, in the midst of what appears to be bewilderment and worse than that, a sort of jingoism, there are more grassroots organizations than ever before. And this is a legacy of the 60s, believe it or not. They don't make 6 o'clock news. It's not the civil rights movement or the anti-Vietnam War movement. But it is Elena Maria Motes Rodriguez. She weighs 90 pounds, a very delicate little China doll of a Puerto Rican housewife, mother of about 8 kids, who stopped Waste Management, Inc., the big multinational, from starting a waste dump in the community. She beat it. And this happens in many communities. There's a group led by someone else that beat a utility when they won an outrageous rate hike. And, of course, the environmental groups. And a young computer whiz I know says there are 6,000 peace groups in the country. Some may have a few members, but 6,000. Now, you see, they're not coalesced. They're diverse. They're disparate and don't make the headlines or the news, but they're there. So that's going on at the same time as a great many despair. I don't want to talk too long here because I want you to ask questions. Just this observation I made. We hear first, apathy. I've heard great about apathy on campus. Now, maybe in a great many cases, but you're here. That's not apathetic on your part. And I want you to know it always has been a minority. Even when the civil rights thing first broke out, certainly the anti-war movement, it was a minority, then it became more. When this country was founded, are we kidding? The great many would have gone along with King George III. Didn't matter. There was those agitators of the Boston Tea Party, Sam Adams and the others, who started it going. Or for that, and you want to be theological about it, at the Hill of Calvary, who were these Christians who were subversives during the time of the Roman Empire? They were, some would say, the commies of their day. They had informers, a informer certainly, a big one. And so that's all part of it too, you see. But I find out that the most popular course on some campuses, despite talk apathy, are courses on the Vietnam War, its beginnings, standing room only. In a number, I don't know if it's taught here or not. Is it taught here? A course on the Vietnam War? I know it's Berkeley, I know it's Eastern places and a lot of other places. Most popular course on the campus. So there is this hunger for knowledge if it's really offered. Maybe the despair, the apathy may be due to the fact there's no course open to them. But I found this out, and I'll end my conversation with this, that the despair is felt among a great many who sit by and watch and do nothing. But Gene Gump feels no despair at all. Neither does her husband, Joe, who followed suit, and he was arrested and is in a prison. Now, the Gene and Joe Gump story is a great love story. But I don't think the TV channel that gave us Dynasty in Dallas is going to do the Gump story. But Gene and Joe Gump and the others I could name who were active, this Puerto Rican woman, Tom Grissom, the physicist who quit a top job because he didn't want to have anything to do with nuclear manufacture. Wilma Green, who came out of a public housing, one of the best paralegals there is, ombudsman on behalf of tenants' rights around and about the Midwest. They all feel a sense of optimism because they're involved in something. The juices are flowing. They're doing something positive, and they see they lose a lot. They lose. But now and then that small triumph tells them, hey, something can happen. So that is pretty much it. So people ask me, how do I feel? Why is this book seemingly more pessimistic than the other books? I say I'm neither pessimist nor an optimist. I'm a yo-yo. I am an emotional yo-yo. I pick up a headline, I see about the debate and who won the debate. I see the polls, and I say, we're not going to make it. And then I bump into Gene and Joe Gump and Elena Maria Montes Rodriguez and Wilma Green. And I say, hey, maybe we can. So that's what it's all about. And now I'm open to questions. And as Mayor Daley Chicago used to say, I thank you.
We have microphones available on both sides of the ballroom, and afterward, Mr. Terkel will be available to sign his new book in the back.
Yeah, you better, because I don't quite... You repeat the question when it's done. Maybe I don't quite get it. What did you say, Wendy? I didn't hear it.
That we have microphones on both sides of the ballroom so that you can come up, so that it'll be much easier for everyone to hear your question.
All right. And then we'll do the signing later, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for coming, Studs. I was real glad to hear you say there's 6,000 peace groups. And another thing that I wanted to talk about to make sure you knew and make sure everyone knew is this current October 15th issue of The Economist has on the cover of it sort of green leaves. And it says, politicians are changing their color. And what this refers to is the Green movement. And the Greens in Germany and throughout Europe it's based on 4 ideas: decentralization, feminism, nonviolence, and sort of an end to patriarchy. And I just wanted to make sure everyone knew there were 130 green organizations in the United States, and there is a green movement. They've opted not to be called a political party now. But something you said you can comment on that, but something you said the other day on the radio, which is something I agree with, is what if Dukakis had taken Jim Hightower from Texas?
Oh, you heard that.
Yeah, and here's a guy that is so knowledgeable in agriculture, and a green position on this is that really presidential candidates would be wise to run as a team. You get your 10 guys, your housing guy doesn't have to talk about agriculture. What do you think about a team
let's
approach?
break down what he just said. Now, I assume you all know what the green movement is. It's based on environmental health and sanity. In Germany, it's been a strong movement. It's had its setbacks recently, back and forth. It won significantly in Sweden and in other countries. It's green movement. I didn't know there were 130, you say?
Yeah.
Green, that's terrific. Yeah. That is, see, something, there are new ways of thinking to be called on, too. And the green movement can easily be coalesced with the peace movement, you see. Now, the matter of Hightower, I don't want to dwell on this too much, what might have been, because I hope you'll all vote, how can I put it, against Bush and Quayle. Let's put it that way. But this is conjecture for the future. You know who Jim Hightower is? Jim Hightower is the Commissioner of Agriculture State of Texas, one of the most popular politicians Texas ever had, who has a greater following in Texas than Lloyd Bentsen does. It certainly is big. And the assumption that Lloyd Bentsen is the guy who's going to carry Texas is the assumption that Texas is monolithic. Texas is John Wayne and John Connolly and Lloyd Bentsen and Phil Graham. Texas is also Maverick. The name Maverick that you heard about comes from Congressman Maury Maverick, who was a populist who was tremendous and powerful, and his son. It comes from there's an old Texas tradition of populism. The early Germans of the failed 48 revolutions came there 100 and some years ago, and Texas has a double tradition. And Dukakis called on one, the venal one. Jimmy Hightower is funny and witty. He would have demolished Quayle and Bush all rolled into one. And Jimmy knows the plight of the farmers, and of course the would have been, but let's not dwell on that now. Let's wait for later. But in any event, the green movement, that's a very exciting comment.
How about the team approach to presidency, like a circle of intelligence instead of...
Anything, sure, better than this. Let's have a couple of more questions. Yes, ma'am.
I was talking to a friend yesterday on the phone, long distance, and he was telling me about a girl that was dating a friend of his who was very intelligent, seemed to be bright and very successful real estate salesperson. And his friend had asked her if she knew who the first president of the United States was, and she didn't know. And then he asked her if she knew who fought the Civil War, and she didn't know. And this is part of, I guess, what you're talking about the national amnesia. But I mean, to what are you attributing this malaise of history? Or
there isn't anyone. There's so many things. You know, recent high school poll, they thought Chair Noble is the full name of Chair. No, now we can go on and do this, but it ain't. She asked the question, to what do I attribute it? I think it has to come from so many things. Not just the emphasis on making the buck, not just the emphasis on business administration and computer programming and engineering. It's more than that. These are legacies of past that have hung on, and a press that becomes very craven, and media that's become craven. Remember, the emphasis has always been on the trivial in all the media, on the trivial. The Chicago Sun-Times on Monday, after Sunday's pro football games, the first 22 pages of sports. So if World War III broke out, you'd turn to page 23 to find out about it. Now, the thing, it's attributed to, if I could just add this one thing, why this ignorance of history and knowledge of trivia? There's still a hangover, believe it or not, of an old name, Joe McCarthy and Witch Hunt. Because in those days, people got so scared, they didn't speak of serious issues anymore. So they spoke of babies and football and baseball, and that has hung on. And even now, you see, you have a situation at parties, cock gathering, where this young guy in the book, Another Hopeful Sign, David Fensel, is very middle American, very much. Rather conservative, but liked folk music. And David Fensel was chairman of the jury that acquitted a nun and 4 others for sitting down in front of a naval training station in Chicago, because he heard stuff at that trial. The judge happened to allow the plea of greater necessity. And he heard some ex-CIA guys talk about things. And his eyes were opened. And he's a new man. And he says, now I realize all this trivia that comes through. Announcements are made of vital importance, it seems, on 6 o'clock news. Next day they're forgotten and something new comes up. He said, when I talk at a party, and I tell about this case or about Nicaragua, second thoughts on it, they walk away, this guy's a bore. Others become interested. When he walk away, he's a bore. It's become fashionable to be ignorant. Let me put it this way. The guy who loves Ronald Reagan knows Ronald Reagan will never be confused with Albert Einstein. No, they know that. They know Ronald Reagan is not very bright. Now, this is common knowledge. They know that. And not just the books that give a number of books, whether Gary Wills' Reagan's America, in which he confuses the movie with the reality, or whether it be the recent book Landslide. People know that. And they don't mind that, because it tells them if the man holding the highest office in the land is a dummy, he is Peter Sellers in Being There. Remember Peter Sellers in Being There? He's a dummy. I don't have to be bright either. And you see, I can just get along. In fact, there becomes at times a pride in ignorance. There's one girl sensed that, a blue-collar suburb. She's questioning, and her young husband and the guys there at the bar after a softball game, they're ribbing her. She's an idiot, she's stupid, because she raised all these questions. And they're talking about the Bears, of course, and other things. And so it is fashionable not to be a bigot. It's fashionable to be ignorant. And because the president is, and the possibility of Dan Quayle becoming a president eventually, will make idiocy the vogue of the time. And so that's one of the reasons why it's become a vogue. Schools, of course, have never taught us about the Depression, World War II. Why would this girl say Russia was Germany's ally? The legacy of the Cold War plays a role. All these are legacies we have to beat. And there is a legacy of the 60s still hanging in there. I call that the slender reeds. When you're in a swamp water, as we are, you cling on to slender reeds. And we do. And they may be pretty strong ones. Yes, sir.
Do you think that I don't think people see George Bush as being very ignorant. I was wondering, I'm in this, bout of despair right now over the elections. I thought we were going to come out of 8 years of Novocaine. And I'm just wondering, what do you see is going on right now in people's minds? Your point about the liberals is very pointed to me. What are people responding to, and where do you think we're going to go in the next 4 years?
Where are we going to go next 4 years? I'm not Nostradamus, but it doesn't take a Nostradamus to know we're going to be in trouble. That's pretty safe to say. What kind of trouble? Well, yesterday is the first anniversary of what happened on Wall Street, right? That crash a year ago. Well, to me, at my age, it was 1929 October, and that began the Great Depression. We know that the farm, I love the way Reagan and Bush and Dukakis too talk about the sanctity of the family. The family considered the core of America once upon it being destroyed. That's the farm family. The family farmer, I've been visiting. In the book you find cases. The 4th generation, dying, going. The son wants to be a farmer, can't. Works at a factory somewhere. They're going. The steel mills are closing, right? We fake the statistics. You can have a lot of fun with government statistics. It says lowest unemployment rate. Unemployment going down. Are they kidding? The $15 an hour steel worker of the plant that's now closed is pumping gas at $3.50 an hour. And he's listed as newly employed. So that's part of it. So we'll have a little difficulty, I think. But out of that difficulty has to come some recognition and some kind of coalescence. One more, and then we're going to Then we have to do that sign-in stuff. This could be it.
I'd like to know what the main points of the Republican ideology are that you're so against. I'd like to know what the main points of the Republican ideology are that you're so against. In other words, if I told you that 40% of the people in this room were Republicans, how would you try to convince them to vote for Dukakis?
Well, I pretty much tried to make it as personal as I could. About a person, I would cite these cases, these people I know, the situation as it is, the farmer, and that's you do the best you can. I think you don't speak in generalities. I wouldn't use the word liberal and conservative because they've lost their meaning long ago. You know what I call myself? I call myself a radical conservative. Now let me explain that. Radical, again, the dictionary. Radical is one who goes to the root of things. Radical, to the cause of things. Conservative, I'm a conservative. I want to conserve the Bill of Rights, especially the First Amendment. I want to conserve the fresh air, whatever there is of it, here in Los Angeles. I want to conserve clean water, green forests, and I want to conserve whatever semblance of sanity we have left. So I'm a radical, just to show, so I wouldn't use any labels at all and make it as personal as possible. And that's otherwise, then they'll have to go through some experience, and then maybe they'll learn. But I hate to see it happen that way. So a guy this morning had a terrible thing happen to me in the writing here. Read an item about a town where health insurance is a subject, but not a big subject. The couple with AIDS victims' kids were going to vote for Dukakis. It came out for health insurance, and Bush definitely against it. Another guy runs a hardware store. I'm more for Bush than ever. I don't want the government to tell me what to do. And then I had that awful feeling. I hope this guy gets a disease. You know, it's a terrible feeling. The fact is, I did hope he gets a disease. It's a terrible, perverted feeling I had. Sometimes you get that feeling. You got to fight it. I don't fight it too hard, but you got to fight it. So that's I think, closing on a personal note, my confession of the evil thoughts I have. It's a good way. And now we can, I hope, have some signings. Thank you.
Mr. Terkel will be available signing his new book in the back of the room for the next hour. Please join me again in thanking him for being here today.